Hi, everyone, and welcome to this Q&A for the panel on infrastructure challenges, technology, and innovation. I am Madeline Sullivan, and today we have with us a great panel of experts. We have Mr. Giuseppe Saba, Chief Executive Officer at International Humanitarian City, Dubai. Mr. Dagbjartur Brynjolfsson, Program Manager for Emergency Preparedness and Response at NetHope. Mr. Amour Shandul, Logistics Innovation Responsible at Doctors Without Borders. And Mr. Gurgui S. Diallo, CEO at Pan Africare. So if you'd like to know more about our panelists, please read their bios in the platform or see their own introductions in the recorded panel debate. So during the debate, we touched upon a few keywords and topics I think we all agreed that are quite essential to disaster relief: preparedness, partnerships, sharing information, and training. I'm sure we'll get into some of these topics during our Q&A. And we received several questions, and I think we'll just kick it off with the first one. So how can innovation and technology help responders be more prepared in disaster response? Maybe Dagbjartur, would you like to start?
Yeah, certainly. This is a little bit of question of the black swan or what we don't know. What we haven't already invented, how can that support? But I think being aware of changing in technology, there are a lot of changes in the technology today. There are new satellite constellations being set up, and I think that will definitely have a big change on the environment, and the evolution of technology is so fast, and people are so quick to adapt to the technology that yeah, it's sometimes hard to follow actually for those that are deploying, because many times the technology is already out there with our responders and the people on the ground before we can basically adopt it very well into our portfolio, and that's also because in a disaster response, especially on the first stages of a disaster response, we cannot be testing things. We have to have with us proven technology, something that we know that will work and that we will not need to put a lot of effort into keeping alive, basically.
Thank you. Anyone else wanted to? Okay, so we'll jump into the next question. What are the main infrastructure challenges from COVID-19 in terms of emergency response? Giuseppe, you mentioned some of the challenges that you had during the COVID-19. Maybe you wanted to answer this one.
Thank you, Madeline. Yes, of course, challenges in terms of infrastructure during the COVID-19 is quite obvious, mainly represented by the demand of temperature control storage. What we noted here within the International Humanitarian City is an exponential growth of the prepositional health stocks. In 4 years, we jumped from $4 million average. We jumped into the current, and today we are on $70 million of stocks, which require, of course, not only storage space, but appropriated storage space in terms of temperature control. And of course, other infrastructure represented by the other challenges are represented by the cold chain, and ensure the cold chain up to the last mile of the vaccines, for example, still represent a challenge, especially considering that the massive need now of vaccines going into the field. This is for sure one of the challenges. Thank you.
Thank you. So we got a question. Let's see here. One of the major challenges to introduce the newest technology from the private sector is that we often fail to consider and acknowledge them in the requirements of a public procurement. Do you think that there's sometimes a knowledge gap between the public and the private sector regarding existing innovation in the market? And how can we make sure that project managers and the sourcing department acknowledge and introduce new technology more quickly, allowing the communities to have access to the best possible solution? So does anybody want to see, how can we close this knowledge gap? Amur, would you be willing to share your experiences?
Sure. It's quite a thin line between the private sector and the humanitarian sector. It's a really thin line where private sector seek to have a gain or a lucrative gain, and humanitarians mainly their gain is saving people. So this doesn't mean that these are two confronting values. No, at all. This is the world how it is. Without the private sector, we cannot operate. This is clear. I mean, who supply us with cars? Who supply us with masks? But there is a lack of understanding from the humanitarian sector that these people, let's call them these people, need to gain something, and a lack of specifications or understanding of what we face in some contexts or environments where they don't really understand. And you sometimes meet someone who tells you about a very, very high-tech things that are not possible to be implemented in some contexts. And you tell them, look, you may want to lower your technology to this level and make it more simple. And from there, we start the joint R&Ds, and we start working together. And one of the small initiatives that we do normally in MSF, we call it show and tell, where, for instance, we bring humanitarians in a very informal way, and private sector. We sit in one room. Before COVID, now we sit remotely, and we debate, we discuss, and then people start connecting the dots and understanding how it should look like, this system or this technology, or for private sector as well, to look how big is the humanitarian market, how interesting this humanitarian market for their business. Over to you, Madeleine.
Thank you, Amor. So how can we make sure that the best possible technology gets introduced when the lowest price remain the key evaluation criteria? I'm sure many of you have some reflections here. Dagbjartur, do you want to start? You're nodding your head.
No, certainly, and this comes down to what we talked a lot about in our panel discussion: partnerships. And I think there needs to be a clear partnership between the private sector and the responders or the humanitarian organizations, both to evolve so that the humanitarian organizations are part of the evolvement of the product, so that because you cannot always take a commercial product and push it onto an emergency or an emergency disaster context. There has to be a partnership. There has to be a communication between us and the private sector. NatHope works a lot with many tech companies, and that's exactly what we do. we inform them about what works and what doesn't work, so that they can work that into their products. I think this is a key thing here. But again, this has to be a win-win situation. It cannot only be that the NGOs or the humanitarian organizations are free guinea pigs for the private sector. There has to come something back from the private sector. Not that we just test and give them information, then we have to buy everything full price. It doesn't work that way. And the newest and the best is usually the most expensive. And being a responder to a disaster, you don't have all the funds that you need. I don't know about any organization deploying to a disaster and having enough funds that can do whatever they want to do. So people try to stretch the dollar as much as possible, which means that you don't necessarily go for the most expensive thing, but you get what's enough, what will get you there, what will get you the most impact for the dollar, basically. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think
just
what's necessary. Good.
I want to just add the word on that. Most of the collaboration we have right now between the humanitarian actors and the private sector is like that traditional collaboration, where humanitarian actors, they produce, from private sector. But right now, I think what we need to go is the co-creation. We need to co-create innovation, and when we talk about the innovation, we talk about the product, we talk about the process, and even, the business model. And this, we bring, we'll bring the powerful of research, because we know that private sector, they can invest on research, on new product. And that's what we need. So to fill the gap between the humanitarian actors and the private sector, I think, both sides, they need to do something, because humanitarian actors, their only motivation is to make sure that, they can assist the most in needs, all right? Private sector, they're looking for new markets, and for sure, there is something to do there. But, it couldn't be just based on, procuring product, that could go right now to co-creation. People, they need to synergize together, to be together, to work together, to think together, to develop product together and scale up together. And then, this gives, opportunity to build new markets. That's where we want to go. And we have, sometimes we have some example. For example, when I'm looking, World Food Program, what they're doing with MasterCard, and even, in some of our emergency program, what we are doing with some operator, using, cash money, to the cash vouchers, using, the M-money, the e-money. There is a lot of things to do and a lot of, process to be developed. But once again, we need to have that strong collaboration before disaster, building, and exploring new innovation, learning the lesson from the field. Humanitarian actor, we are the last mile, and so we can capture the picture on, on the disaster, and bring it on the table, and use the powerful of research that private sector can give, the powerful of scaling up, developing new market, then they can give, to co-create, dynamic solution that can respond efficiently, to disaster.
Thank you. I wanted to follow up on that, and I'm sure all of you have reflections on this, but how can the private sector get more insight into the challenges on the ground, so that they can develop solutions that are catered to the actual needs of the recipients of the products or the services? Do you have any suggestions on how that can happen? Seb, perhaps?
I think panel like this, help us to happen.
Madeline, let me bring to you the example of how international humanitarian city is organized. Yes, it's true that we are the largest humanitarian hub in the world, but we are even, let me say, a city which is hosting the humanitarian organizations, and I'm talking about the main players, starting from the UN agencies, passing through the international humanitarian organizations. Amur as MSF, he knows very well that we are hosting even MSF within the International Humanitarian City, NGOs, and then the commercial companies, manufacturers. Amur and Kogi were mentioning about the fact that we need a dialogue between the humanitarians and the commercial companies. And for a very simple reason, we as humanitarian, I consider myself a humanitarian work, we know what is happening in the field. We know the challenges that we can have in the field, but we don't have absolutely any clue how to solve those challenges, how to get a solution. Now, I believe that we need, this is a must, to get the support from those companies that are holding exactly the technologies. And here, when we talk about the new technologies, not necessarily we are talking about high tech, because it is obvious that if I should enter into the territory of Doug is going to tell me that, and correctly is going to tell me that telecommunication is a huge priority in the emergency response. There is no doubt. Other technologies are extremely important into the emergency response for sharing information, for facilitating the movement through the borders and through the customs borders for the humanitarian aid and so on and so on. But here, going back to your question, do not forget that there is another aspect which is called procurement. And procurement in some organizations represents a very bureaucratic process. And sometimes this bureaucratic process is totally forgetting about this kind of cooperation which is finalized in order to get the best of the solutions. So since I left the UN and since I joined the International Humanitarian City, I started and trying to pass the message that the commercial companies, the manufacturers are not the devil of the business. They are part of the business, they are part of our solution, and we need to work together with them in a very transparent manner. Amur said, we used to sit together around the table, he said informally. Now, formally or informal, what I'm looking are the results. But for sure, I know how does it work, the procurement within governments, I know how does it work, the procurement within the UN agencies and so on. Everybody is trying to do something that should be extremely transparent because nobody wants to be accused about corruption. Let's use the right words, the right concerns that sometimes we have in place. But this is something that for sure we need to get into a mechanism that is based on a very transparent dialogue. Both of us, we have the interest of using the best that we can use for serving the others. Thank you.
Thank you. So one more last question on the private sector theme here. Which incentives do we need to improve to have more active participants from the private sector? Amur, do you have any reflections here?
It's a hard question, to be honest, because I have my own perception from the humanitarian part. I've been myself in the private sector before joining MSF. It's not only about money. It's not only about financial gain for companies. There is also branding, where companies want to say, I work with this or that institution, and this is important for the survival of a company. Then there is also attracting another market. It's not the usual consumer market where there is stereotypes of goods where they supply or they procure. It's very specific market. It's a huge market, let me call it as well, the humanitarian market. I hate the word market, but for when we talk about supply chain, it becomes a market. So here it's also, I see that a lot of private sector try to work with us also to have the knowledge which they don't own, which is also important. When we talk about epidemics, when we talk about surviving a disaster for populations, these all things that companies try as much as possible to learn from and to develop out of that something useful. So it's not only about money in the end, over.
I agree, coming from the private sector. So,
Madeleine, allow me to add a couple of lines. Obvious that private sector in cooperating with the humanitarians would like to get some visibility, which is quite obvious. Is even an issue of reputation to be associated with a humanitarian organization. So private sector company working closely with the humanitarian organization is a sort of extremely reputational business card that is coming up. I can give you one of the best examples that I had during the Southeast Asia tsunami, when logistics companies that usually are in competition within the market, they started in working together in order to facilitate movement or customs process using their own forwarding agent and so on and so on. But again, they are extremely important for the humanitarian community today, the private sector. Obvious that supporting the humanitarian community, they can gain in terms of visibility and reputation. And I believe that this is something that if we are doing a good due diligence, I believe that we should not be scared in associating ourselves to the private sector. This is something that happens frequently. Thank you.
If I might just jump in, I agree with both Amor and Giuseppe here. There are many ways that the private sector actually can participate. We at NetHub, for example, have partnerships with some of the biggest tech companies in the world that actually deploy with it. They send people with us to deployments, to disasters, to support with whatever is being built up. This kind of support is fantastic, I must say. And what we've seen is we have competitors standing side by side in a disaster somewhere, deploying with NetHub and working as one unit, one person basically. No tension or anything between them. They just come and they're super professional. And so we all, and this is of course an HR thing as well for the company to be able to allow their staff to contribute. And this is done both by deploying and by supporting from their offices, from the back end basically. So this is an important part of what we do. So yeah, I think it's important to again, I'm starting to sound like a broken record. It comes down to partnerships, to build the partnerships, to talk together, sit down and discuss how can you support one another, and how can the private sector or the company support the responders, definitely, or the humanitarian sector. Thank you.
Thank you. Gurgi, do you want to have the last word here in terms of the private sector and humanitarian sector partnerships?
Oh yeah, as I tell you, I mean, based on this cooperation, because the private sector, I mean, branding is good, you know, but all those should participate to helping the private sector to make more money. At the end of the day, the decision will be based on the fact that they make profit or no. Because this is why, you know, they are private sector, you know, is to make profit. And the leaders of any private company, you know, is first of all looking to be engaged in relationship that can help them, you know, to grow the income. So during the co-creation, evidence should be given to them that, you know, there is a new market and they can develop through, you know, these new innovations. Because most of the time when private sector, you know, understand it, they think that, you know, the community, the poor community cannot contribute. And that's not true. There is really, you know, market on so many products, you know, that can be developed within, you know, this community that we think that they are poor and vulnerable. That's not true. But this is also a matter of knowledge, of getting, you know, the real sense of what is happening on the ground. And this can be done in a very strategic, you know, collaboration. Let me give you an example. We collaborate with an IT company, a private US company, to develop our solution. But the collaboration we had with them was built during, you know, the proposal writing, because we was looking for an innovative solution. And when we found that this company is developing the solution, you know, we established a collaboration with them, and they accept to be on the deal, right? So we developed the solution together, we developed the proposal together, we submitted to the donor together, and when it was funded, you know, then right now, then the program is over. They keep making money, you know, by hosting the data, you know, by so many small things, and even start collaborating with some other, you know, private company in the countries, you know, I mean, extending their market. So those are the type of things that we need to do, you know, those strategic collaboration. And I think, you know, even like this, you know, can help to fill the gap. But also, you know, the US government, the government, not your government, all governments have, you know, key role to play. But also UN, you know, UN. What about, you know, building a new fund to promote, you know, innovative collaboration between humanitarian actors and private sector, asking people, you know, to support development of new product on process based on, you know, some gap that was identified during intervention, during disaster. You know, those type of funds, you know, are incitative because they can help, you know, to support some of the costs that, you know, humanitarian organization cannot support because they don't have the money. But private sector sometimes, you know, they don't support because this is uncertain market. And then, you know, we can use, you know, those type of funding, you know, available in, you know, in the world, and UN can lead those type of process. Government can lead it. You know, this example, during the panel, I gave the example of Grand Challenge. You know, Grand Challenge is like a basket where several donors, they put their money, you know, just to support what they call the unconventional ideas. You have your small ideas, they give you small funds to build the proof of the proof. If the proof is built, you know, they put you under another pipeline, you know, to scale. Those are the type of things I think that need to be done, but also private sector need to know and inform that, you know, for them, you know, the humanitarian actors are also some actor to be considered, because we have a lot of innovation coming from our work. As I tell you before, innovation is not just expectation, you know, of cities, you know, and you know, we have a lot of things that we learn from the field, where, you know, private sector also have, you know, they have input, you know, to develop product, to develop new ideas, new solutions, and so on. So this is I think this is a big piece, but I think if we have, like, as I tell you before, like this event, if we have, this, how to call it, this routine to be associated in panel, discuss together, I think we can one of the day come out with something, that, help us to fill the gap.
Thank you. I agree. I hope we one day can fill the gap. So I think our time is up, unfortunately. I want to thank you all for joining the panel, and all of you for watching. And I hope you all have a great conference. Thank you.